As a photojournalist during the 60s and 70s, my photographs appeared in major magazines such as Life, Paris Match and Stern. In this video, I'll be telling you all about the cameras I used, showing you the photographs I took, and explaining the technical problems that had to be overcome in order to capture them. Hello. Over the past few weeks I've been showing you some of my many photographs I took during the 60s and 70s, depicting different aspects of childhood in those distant times. Now, although most of these were taken quite openly, usually with my Nikons, which were my favourite photojournalistic camera, a few required either more discreet or in some cases actually covert, that is spy type cameras, in order to obtain them. On the subject of discreet pictures, take these pictures of a little boy who was able to see for the first time since birth thanks to a life-saving operation during which his faulty lenses had been replaced by artificial eyes. While all my photographs, both in the operating theatre and at his home, were taken with the full knowledge and agreement of both his parents and the medical staff involved, it was essential that I worked very quietly and discreetly under poor light conditions in order to disturb the child or make the light too powerful for his eyes. Now, clearly these were situations in which it is impossible to use any kind of flash or lighting, since the little boy's eyes were, as I say, so sensitive to the light. For this reason I decided to use my black-bodied Leica M4 camera, 35mm rangefinder camera, which I always fitted with Kodak Tri-X film, and on this occasion I operated it from 400 to 800 ASA. The Leica was a firm favourite with European journalists both during and after the World War II, although the Leica M4, which I was using, started production in November 1966. So let's take a closer look at this beautiful little camera. This slightly wide-angle 35mm lens is the Canadian-built 1.4 Minox. The camera has shutter speeds which range from B for bulb, where it remains open for as long as you wish, and 1 second up to 1,000th of a second, and these are set here. Beside the shutter is the ergonomically shaped and extremely easy to use film wind lever. As you can hear, the shutter is very quiet, and having a black body, the camera is far less obtrusive than the larger chrome Nikons I was using. Being a rangefinder camera, it means that focus can be extremely precise even at the low light levels. This Leica is fitted with a selenium cell light meter to ensure the best exposures. So what about the photographs I shot with it? To take this picture in the family's living room, which was lit due to the boy's acute sensitivity to light by a single 20-watt lamp, so it was very dim. Here I had to use a 1/15th of a second at f1.4 while I rated the Tri-X film, normally rated at 400 ASA, up to 800 ASA in the processing. The picture of him looking wistfully out of the window into the garden was shot at f4 with 125th of a second. In the operating theatre I used the same Leica camera, this time in a sterile container, and I shot at 250th of a second at f2.8, this time working with a 35mm longer focus lens. This enabled me to get a close-up without also getting in the surgeon's way. While working behind the Iron Curtain during the 60s and early 70s, especially when in the communist-controlled DDR, German Democratic Republic, where security was extremely tight and photography was severely limited, I occasionally used a miniature Tessina spy camera, which is here. This is a remarkable and ingenious piece of Swiss engineering. The Tessina was painted by a guy called Dr. Rudolf Steineck in Lugano, Switzerland in 1957, and remained in production until 1966. This camera was acclaimed as being the smallest precision camera to accept standard 35mm film. The film had, however, to be loaded onto a special cassette which you used in this camera, and you loaded this using this special device. A standard 35mm film was inserted in one side of the Tessina, while the Tessina cassette went into the other. Simply by winding this handle, the film could be transferred between the two cassettes in full daylight. The Tessina took 14 by 21mm size pictures, with the film in the camera being wound on by clockwork. By turning this wheel a few times, the clockwork would be fully wound and would expose up to 8 frames of film before you had to rewind it. Despite its appearances, the Tessina was in fact a twin lens reflex, using one mirror to reflect light into the viewfinder, while a second mirror behind the lens reflected the image onto the film, which travelled across the base of the camera in order to save space. Apertures range from f2.8 to f22, and the Tessina has a shutter speed from 1/2 second to 1/500 of a second plus bulb. The Tessina focuses down to 9 inches, which made it ideal for photographing documents as well as people and scenes. This was a precision instrument which weighed less than a packet of cigarettes, and it was assembled by hand from around 200 precision-made parts. It also contains ruby bearings, as in a Swiss watch, to reduce friction. When on assignment for a German magazine to report on the brutal punishments being administered in some British boarding schools, well, I say most British boarding schools, I would say from experience, most of the pictures here were taken openly with the permission of the school, although they did place considerable restrictions on what I could and could not photograph. My essential picture for the magazine, what journalists called the key shot, was of a pupil being actually beaten. To obtain one took me 2 months of careful negotiation with the master involved. Finally, and after many drinks of beer in the pub, he agreed that I could observe him administering the punishment with his beat-along cane, but he strictly forbade any photography. Since it was essential to the story to capture this picture, I decided I had to do it covertly. I would only have one shot, and so I rehearsed it carefully, with the Tessina concealed in the sleeve of my left arm, and fired using a long cable release which ran around my back to my right sleeve, where it could be discreetly operated using 2 fingers. I even went to the lengths of hiring a small rehearsal room, approximately the size of the master's study, where I knew the beatings would take place. I arranged the light levels to be similar to that I had seen in his study, and employed 2 male models to play the roles of the teenager being beaten and the second teacher. Needless to say, neither was of course beaten. This allowed me to establish the exposure and focus needed, together with my best camera angle. The exposure turned out to be 1/50 of a second at f2.8. Before the beating took place in that same afternoon, I met up with the 17-year-old who was due for a meeting with the master that evening, and obtained his verbal consent to try and obtain a picture. The master was of course not informed of what I had in mind. After the picture had been taken, both the teenager himself and his outraged parents gave the magazine permission to publish. Now I have to say we all expected legal action to follow its publication, which took place about 3 months later in the major German magazine. However, by that time the master had left the school, apparently under a dark cloud, and I never saw or heard from him again. Before leaving the subject of covert or spy cameras, let me describe the the third sub-miniature camera in my possession. This is the Minox, a little camera invented by Walter Zapp, a Baltic German, in 1936. When still a child, Walter's family moved him to Estonia, where after leaving school he worked first as engraver before finding a position with a photographer, although I don't know what position that was, perhaps in the darkroom. He came up with the idea of inventing a camera so small and light it could always be carried around with you, and this was it. As well as becoming popular with gadget lovers all over the world, the Minox also became a firm favourite due to its small size and close-up focusing ability with intelligence agencies in America, Britain and Germany. During the Second World War, production in the Latvian factory was halted after that country fell victims first to an invasion by the Soviet Union, then by the Germans, followed by the Soviets again. But the camera was very popular with Nazi spies and also used by the Nazi elite as a status symbol. In 1948, production restarted at a West German based company. So let's look in more details at this clever little camera. As I said earlier, it's close focusing, the lens focuses down to 8 inches, and small size make it perfect for covert operations such as surveillance or document copying. An 18-inch 460mm measuring chain is provided, as you can see here, to make it easier for copying documents. You just raise the camera to the top of the chain and everything will be sharp. On the few occasions I used it professionally, it was, I have to say, mostly for photographing documents, which for various reasons I was not permitted to photocopy, to borrow or to purchase. The 15mm 35mm lens projects the image 8 by 11mm onto the negative, which is in strips 9.2mm wide. That's about less than a quarter of the size of a 35mm film. Like 35mm film, there are no sprockets. The camera has shutter speeds from 1/1000th to half a second, together with bulb and time. Above the viewfinder is a filter bar, which enables you to use a screen or neutral density filter over the lens. To take a photograph, you simply open the camera, which winds on the film and cocks the shutter, and then press the shutter release. Here. You don't have to estimate shutter speeds or s-stops, as the built-in light meter is coupled with the shutter speed dial and will always give you the correct exposure. There are 2 engraved discs on the Minox control panel. One sets exposure and the other focus. And there we have it, the famous Minox, beloved by spies of yesteryear and gadget lovers of today. You can still find them on eBay, and they're not especially expensive, so if you're a camera collector, it's well worthwhile adding one of these historically valuable cameras to your collection. Next week I'm going to take you to sea with one of the first photo essays I shot in round about 1965 or 64, which shows the life of a North Sea trawler in those days, as indeed today. Very hard, very tough and very dangerous. Thanks for watching. Bye bye. If you'd like to see some more of my photographs, please go to www.thewayitwas.uk. If you'd like to purchase a copy of my book, The Way It Was, then please go to the same website and take a look at what it contains. If you lived through the 60s, it will bring back some memories. If you never lived through the 60s, you'll find a foreign country where they do things very different.